it's time to get into Hallie's specialty, Oklahoma State football. We had a good discussion about the NCAA and Brock Hoffman. None of us like that. Decent people wouldn't. Talked about the great story from Royce Young on James on Curry. Now it's time to break down Oklahoma State football. We had Fazio on yesterday. Even though he's a Patriots fan, we allowed him in studio. That guy and his Boston sports. I like Joseph a lot, but you ask him about Boston sports, he turns into a classic Boston fan.
It was
18 championships that guy's been through. I mean, we're Kansas City fans. I mean, one Royals who they're selling the team, by the way. That guy. He's just got a smirk on his face. Oh, yeah, just 6 Super Bowls in my lifetime. Unbelievable. I would love to live through the sports moments that Joseph Fazio has as a Boston fan. Absolutely unreal.
6 Super Bowls in his lifetime. I don't want to hear him ever complain about anything that happens with the Patriots because he's more than had it good.
That's what he was doing, is out there complaining about the Red Sox. He's like, man, it's been such a brutal year. You won a World Series last year. Like, create a buffer here, man. It's in the same year that his Red Sox won, the Patriots won.
Yeah, it was like the almost humble brag that Tom Brady does, where he'll put himself down a little bit but raise himself back up. It's so Boston-esque.
I enjoyed having him in. He's a great guy. He had a really interesting take about Spencer Sanders. Predicted a win. I think he said 8-4 on the season. I've got it written down here. So Hallie, a couple weeks ago we asked you to break. We went game by game. You gave me a record. At the end of this, I'll ask you if you want to change it. Maybe a redemption. I don't know. But it came out with a depth chart a couple days ago.
Right.
And the interesting thing on there was Calvin Bundage was behind Malcolm Rodriguez, a linebacker. And Calvin Bundage just got cleared to practice. So it's understandable that he's second on the depth chart. Mm-hmm. But Malcolm Rodriguez ahead of him was a little interesting. Did that shock you at all? Or has this been a plan that was put in place a long time ago?
That did shock me. I did not expect to see that when I was holding the depth chart at that last Gundy press conference, which would have been on Friday, because as you mentioned, the fact that Bundage wasn't listed as the starter didn't surprise me because he had been dealing with that back strain. Like you mentioned, just got cleared to practice. And when I asked Coach Gundy if Bundage would start, he said that he didn't know since he was just kind of getting back up to speed with being back in practices. And so he expected him to get some time to play, wouldn't necessarily start. So that part didn't surprise me. But the part that did was Malcolm Rodriguez. He played safety. That's where he was at the depth chart before.
And well.
Yes, he's very good. He's got that still, kind of high school wrestler, tough guy mentality that he brings to the football field. So he was definitely a standout at safety. So I think that's one of the most interesting things to see on the depth chart. And I will really, really be intrigued to see what he can do at that linebacker position. I mean, obviously, Jim Knowles, I know he still had to get acquainted with the Big 12, but obviously he knows what he's doing as a defensive coordinator. So there's going to be something there, but I don't know. It should be interesting.
Well, it is going to be interesting. I mean, I think he's obviously got the speed. He played well at safety. Struggled a little bit at the beginning last year, but the secondary did. Everyone on the defense did, especially at the beginning, translating to this Jim Knowles 4-2-5 defense. So it's basically him and Eamon Ogbongbemiga, which, interesting, I had to write that out for a script today, and hyphenating that and doing the pronunciation. It took me more time to get his last name and the pronunciation than it did to rewrite the 10 sentences. So that was nice. But it's him and Malcolm Rodriguez out there. The other guys in the secondary, obviously, you know about Colby Peel, A.J. Green. There's some strength there, but again, it's that defensive line that is kind of worrying people, and you kind of conflict this with the fact that Oregon State has a really experienced offensive line. They've got a lot of starts on that offensive line, and they've got a veteran, I shouldn't say veteran running back, but he was the top running back in the Pac-12 last year, coming back behind that experienced offensive line. Does that worry you at all if you're Jim Knowles in Oklahoma State?
It's going to be a big test for the defensive line. I don't think they should over-stress about it because Oregon State should be an opponent that they beat, but they've really got to take it seriously and make sure that defensive line is focused, locked in. You've got some guys on that depth chart who I think do have the potential to make a difference, but it's just going to be really interesting to see what they can do. Of course, you've got Brock Martin and Mike Scott out there. Tyler Lacey, who Gundy has talked about Tyler Lacey and said that he's made tremendous strides. Gundy didn't really shy away from saying, Tyler spent last season pretty much asleep, is what he said, which is kind of a bold statement to make about a guy, but pretty much indicated, at least from his perspective, that Tyler Lacey wasn't really taking things that seriously, or maybe didn't have his heart in it all the way. I don't know. But he said this season, going into practice, he seemed to make big strides, really be taking football more seriously. So at those defensive ends, it should be interesting if those guys are kind of stepping it up and taking on those leadership responsibilities to see how that goes. But they aren't not having an easy test here with that Oregon State offensive line to start things off.
No, 92 combined starts on that offensive line for Oregon State. The defensive backs also in the secondary, 73 combined starts, 47 for their linebackers. Everyone else is quite a bit below that. But 92 starts combined for their offensive line. That's big time. So you should probably have that under wraps if you're Jim Knowles and the Oklahoma State Cowboys, especially when you have the inexperience on that line, that we've talked about, and you're moving Malcolm Rodriguez up. Do you get the sense that Calvin Bundage, obviously he just got back in the swing of things, he's not going to start, but do you have a gauge of what his health really is as far as playing strength?
I don't. I mean, all I know is, like I said, from when I asked Coach Gundy about it, of course, he had a back strain, and then he got cleared for going into practice. So, obviously, his health level is at least enough where he can join them and do the regular practicing, scrimmaging, drills, all that the other guys are. Because before, Gundy had mentioned how he had kind of a limited role in practice, really couldn't physically participate much at all. So, at least he's getting back out there. So, the impression I got that what's slowing him down maybe isn't as much his physical health as much as just kind of getting back into the groove of things now that he has recovered. But of course, I'm not a doctor. I haven't talked to Bundage himself. I can't be sure about that, but that is the impression I've gotten so far.
Yeah, I was going to say, for Bundage, it seems like last year, we know he had his health issues, but then it also seems like whenever at least he was sometimes in, it was either A, he was there and he was the physical athlete and freak that he was half the time, or B, it seemed like he might have been checked out of the game mentally. So hopefully going into this season, he's probably still dealing with these issues a little bit. Hopefully he eventually can get them either in check and possibly, I hope, back to what we all know him as can be, what he can be at his peak, because at his peak, he's a freak out there on the field and he can do incredible things. But I also hope that we don't get what we also saw at a couple points last year where it seemed like he was checked out to a point.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Hallie.
Oh, no, I don't even know from my perspective if it seemed like it was so much that he was checked out or as much as he did have injuries that he was battling and he was trying to play through them sometimes, but he just wasn't full strength. Because you do have last season, of course, it was the game against Texas Tech, I believe, where he suffered an injury and then I think didn't play against Kansas. I think that was the order it was in. And then also missed the Liberty Bowl. So with there being games throughout the season when he had some injuries, of course that meant there were other times where he was probably, even if he wasn't playing through injuries, at least kind of trying to fight back to get that full strength. But yeah, when Bundage is at full strength, he's explosive out there. He can really set the tone for the aggressive style of defense that Jim Knowles is trying to bring to the team. So hopefully for him and for the Cowboy defense, he will be able to be healthy this season and be that full strength, aggressive defender Calvin Bundage that they know.
Last year, the Cowboys were 112th in college football in total defense, 87th in rushing defense, and 117th in passing defense. So you have Jamar Jefferson, who's coming back off a great freshman year at Oregon State, where he had 1,300 yards and 12 touchdowns. He has, in his quarterback, some experience, but, I mean, with all due respect to Jake Luton, he transferred from Idaho. He hasn't really started a full season, but last year, 62.5% completion percentage, 1,600 yards to the air, 10 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Again, did not play a ton, I believe 8 games. But their offense last year was bad, but it made a huge jump from the year before because Jonathan Smith comes in. He played at Oregon State, one of the greatest players in Oregon State history. He knows how to win at the program because he did it as the quarterback. He can do those things. He was a great offensive coordinator under Coach Peterson up there in Seattle for University of Washington. Now he comes down. They go 2-10 in his first year as head coach. Second year is a big jump. We saw Gundy kind of make that. They were 4-7. They made a big jump going into Gundy's second year. Now it's interesting because it seems like they find themselves in the same place Oklahoma State was 15 years ago. He's in his second year. He was a quarterback at the school. OSU, they wear orange and black. It seems like he's looking for that staple victory to turn the tide in Corvallis. I don't know if they're capable of it. But a lot of people, including me, for most of the summer have dismissed Oregon State. And it's easy to dismiss them when it's 2 months out of the game because you're not down to the nitty-gritty. We don't have depth charts. You can do this, you can do that. Now you're starting to look at the schools. You're starting to look at the rosters. And we had a phone call last night, and I said, I don't think you should be too worried if you're Oklahoma State because more than likely, if you match up the rosters, Oklahoma State's going to win every time. Like, they have better talent. Mike Gundy, and it's not the five-star blue chips like you have down there in Norman or in Austin or Tuscaloosa. But Oklahoma State's got some talented guys, and they thrive on that, blue-collar, work hard. We're turning 2 stars into 5 stars. We're finding the diamond in the rough. Is Oregon State trying to do the same thing? Probably. But you're combining all of those factors in. Oklahoma State should win. But you can't dismiss, right? Coach Smith. You can't just dismiss them because they went 2-10. You can't dismiss them because they're in probably the worst Power 5 conference in college football. You can't do that because they have a stacked offensive line. Jim Knowles struggled stopping the run. They have a good running back. Jim Knowles struggled stopping the run. How do you stop a high-powered offense? You run it down your opponent's throat. You keep them off the field. So that could be a recipe for a disaster if you're Oklahoma State. They have got to stop the run, and they have got to get off the field on third down. That's the case in Big 12 football. But Jim Knowles, McNeese State, do you show improvement or not? Because remember after that game against Missouri State, everyone's going, Jim Knowles was a brilliant hire. 4-2-5, baby. We're going all the way. And then you saw a real offense, and it dismantled that defense. Absolutely dismantled it. You don't want to let that happen. You're playing a Power 5 team. You're not opening up against McNeese State. You're opening up against Oregon State. So while it is easy to dismiss a program that's under 500 historically, by the way, Oklahoma State wasn't either until Mike Gundy took the reins, but they're under 500 historically. They're coming off a 2-10 season. It's Friday night, Pac-12. They're going to play the underdog card. You can't be completely dismissive of Oregon State.
Yeah, I was going to say with that, you're pretty much on target. With all of this, it's easy to say that we should be able to win this because if you line things up with how everything is, Oregon State is, in every sense of the way, they are the worst team compared to us. We outmatched them in a lot of different positions. But sometimes, depending on your day and depending on your time, that may not matter depending on how the football goes. Because sometimes things could end up working out the way that Oregon State wants them to. If things could go the wrong way for us, they might end up pounding that football all night, and we could have ourselves in for a long Friday night and be up till midnight having a horrible time. But if things are played properly, if you have the discipline that has been touted over the summer, this should be going in the way Oklahoma State wants it to go and to get us back in prime Mike Gundy form the way it needs to go.
Hallie, I've asked you this before, but if you're anything like me, you can talk yourself into a loss the closer the game approaches.
Oh, for sure. I am that way too.
So you weren't nervous a couple weeks ago. Are you nervous now, 2 days away from kickoff?
I do agree with your perspective. I think it's really easy as something gets closer to have doubts, kind of talk yourself into that loss thing, but I still feel pretty much the same as I did before. I think OSU, of course, can't take this Oregon State team lightly, especially OSU's defense can't take Oregon State lightly, but I don't think the Cowboys have to worry about it too much. I think this is going to be a good start for their season to give them that confidence, even though it should be an opponent, obviously, that they should beat. I think it's going to start the season off for a good note, so I am predicting a solid victory for the Cowboys here.
Well, a win means a lot because you beat a Power 5 opponent. You start off 1-0, and you can look forward to McNeese State, which is a win, then an in-state rival Tulsa, which kind of like the Oregon State thing, the closer it gets, we'll talk ourselves into what could happen. But Oklahoma State should beat Tulsa. Even though it's just up the turnpike, they should be able to beat Tulsa. Then you have to go to Texas. So a win means you can just look forward to the next week. A loss? A loss is disastrous. What would a loss mean on Friday night for Oklahoma State?
A loss would mean a not very happy Mike Gundy at the next press conference. We'll start with that. But, I don't know how he'd react. If he'd start, of course, I know he'd obviously say what went wrong, but I don't know if it'd be one of those cases where you just couldn't get many quotes out of him, or if he'd plan some kind of smoothie thing or snowflake rant to just try to distract people from the loss. So no telling how that would go. But I do think, obviously, that would be a rough start for the Cowboys. I think it would be a wake-up call as well, just like, wait a minute, we aren't able to defeat Oregon State. We've got to do something about this. So, of course, the coaches and players, I think, would kind of be kind of frazzled, of course, but also have this new sense of urgency. I don't see that happening, but the Cowboys can definitely not take this Oregon State team for granted. They definitely can't go into it thinking they're automatically the dominant OSU in this situation, because they have to prove themselves. There's so many question marks people have about the Cowboys this season, from the defensive line to kind of changes they have in the O-line to the quarterback battle. Either of the quarterbacks, what will they do? So this is really kind of we have to prove ourselves and get things started on a good note thing for the Cowboys.